Hello, this is Lee Schilling back with part two of What's Health About. And the following is not medical advice, it's food for thought. Well, which has more calories, a pound of sugar or a pound of butter? That's what we left off with at the end of part one. And we'll answer that question in just a couple of slides. So, what is calorie density? Calories are units of energy, foods converted into energy, which is used for the body's current needs, muscles to work, hearts to beat, etc. The most full one are the fruits and veggies, but they all have 500 calories in each stomach. So calorie density is a measure of the calorie content of food relative to its weight or volume. Choosing foods with a low calorie density can help with weight loss. You automatically eat fewer calories while still eating large and filling portions, and you can lose weight much more easily. Or stored in fat for future use. What you can see here are 5 different stomachs, and they each have 500 calories in each one of them. So that should tell you that calories can make a difference. And here you see figures are for a pound of each ingredient. Well, nobody eats a pound of broccoli or any of these at one time. It's to show the relativity of one thing to another. Like a pound of broccoli only has 128 calories, but a pound of olive oil at the very end has 4,000 calories. How many calories can be squeezed into the same size package is what calorie density is about. The more calories, the more dense. Often it's said a calorie is a calorie, but that's just not correct. How it gets metabolized or how much gets absorbed, they both matter. And not all calories are identical or metabolized the same, and that can affect our health. Now, some calories cause disease more than others, and different calories are metabolized differently. So think of calories as foods, makes it easier. Well, the average male needs 2,500 calories each day, and the average female needs 2,000 calories each day. So if you take in and absorb more calories than you burn, you're going to gain weight. And if you take in and absorb less calories than you burn, then you're going to lose weight. So which has more calories, a pound of sugar or a pound of butter? Well, let's find out. And you see the answer at the bottom? A pound of butter has more than twice as many calories as a pound of sugar. And calories are units of energy from our food used to provide energy for our muscles. Excess energy is stored as fat. And what you can see here is that there are 4 categories of what are called macronutrients. So fats and oils, proteins, carbohydrates, and alcohols. So fats and oils have the most calories, 9 per gram. And alcohols are next with 7, followed by proteins and carbohydrates, and they both have 4 calories per gram. And then the pictures show you what these items mean. And most foods don't have just one thing, but may have a variety of things. Like if you eat steak, you're also going to get a little bit of fat. Try to remember 4 different categories and which has more calories. Then you can choose and not bring in more calories than you intended, but you can determine what you want and go from there. Well, what's disease? Disease is a condition that you're either born with, and that's called congenital, and there are a variety of treatments for it depending on what it is. Infectious is a germ-caused disease, and for that, antibiotics and antiviral medicines are used to treat. Organ-related is lifestyle-related, and the way to take care of that is to alter the lifestyle. Cancer is, for the most part, a genetic mutation, but it also may be related to nutrition. And the treatments are usually surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Arterial damage is the main cause for organ disease to the heart, lungs, brain, kidneys, just to name a few. And genetic mutations may be inherited or related to lifestyle. A good example of that mutation could be smoking, but it may be that gene enables you to develop the cancer. Mark Twain smoked a barrel of cigars a year, never got a cancer. Still, I think if you're a smoker, why not just play the odds and quit? If you can't quit, get some help. What we eat affects our health status. Every bite can either help us or harm us. Some foods are shown to be associated with undesirable health effects. Processed foods are one. Some foods are shown to be associated with undesirable health effects, and processed foods are in that category. And by definition, a processed food is a food item that has had a series of mechanical or chemical things done to it to change or preserve it. Processed foods are those that typically come in a box or a bag and contain more than one item on the list of ingredients. May have sugar added, fiber removed, additives for color, texture, and taste. Minimally processed foods such as bagged spinach, cut vegetables, frozen blueberries, and roasted nuts are often simply pre-prepped for convenience. The most heavily processed foods often are frozen or pre-made meats or pre-made meals, including frozen pizza, microwavable dinners, ready-to-eat foods such as crackers, chips, and deli meat are more heavily processed. Heavily processed foods should be avoided when possible. Always check the ingredients on a box. The more ingredients, the more processed the contents. And whole foods have been shown to have desirable effect. They're in their natural form, no fiber removed, no nutrition removed, nutrient dense, and no additives. Trans fats come in two different forms, one just with the food and the other created by adding hydrogens. Those were found to be worse than the normal ones and were banned by the FDA in 2015. Trans fats have been shown to raise the bad cholesterol and to lower the good cholesterol, and that can lead to heart disease. Some foods have added sugars. Would you believe barbecue sauce, ketchup, spaghetti sauce, breakfast cereal? Processed foods have added things that whole foods, plant-based, don't have. Of the 600,000 items in the American food supply, 74% have added sugar, either sucrose or high fructose corn syrup. 50% have greater than the recommendation for added salt. Processed foods shown here are kids' meals. Well, are they fortified kids' breakfast cereals healthy, or are they just candy? And breakfast cereals are number 3 in added sugars intake by food sources among U.S. children and adolescents. Now beware, in 2015, the World Health Organization announced that processed meat is carcinogenic to humans, group 1, and that's the highest group. Then that consumption of red meat is probably carcinogenic to humans. What's a processed meat? That'd be either bacon, ham, hot dog, sausage, and others, as shown in the pictures here. Red meat, unprocessed, would be from meat such as beef, veal, pork, lamb, sheep, horse, and goat. Meat processing, such as curing or smoking, can lead to the formation of potentially cancer-causing chemicals. And cooking at high temperatures, including meats over a flame, or pan frying, grilling, barbecuing, can also produce carcinogenic chemicals. White meat may not be any better. One study showed that there was a 300% or more increase in colon cancer from eating that meat, and they were comparing it to a group of people who didn't eat that but were eating beans, peas, or lentils twice a week. And they had a 50% lower risk than those who never ate those foods. Well, let's talk about fiber. Fiber is a very important food. FDA recommends 25 grams of fiber each day for a 2,000 calorie diet. And the average in the US is about 15 grams of fiber. Your own need may be higher or lower depending on your calorie needs. Fruits, vegetables, legumes, beans, and peas are a good source of dietary fiber. Food derived from animals, meat, eggs, and dairy, have cholesterol, but they have no fiber. Food derived from plants have fiber, but no cholesterol. And all fruits, vegetables, grains, legumes contain some fiber, and there are soluble and insoluble fibers, and many foods have both kinds of fiber. So if you eat a varied diet, you're probably going to get enough fiber. Fiber is very protective. It helps slow the rate of how fast food goes through the intestine or up to the liver, and that's important because you don't want it going too quickly. It can harm the organ if it does. Well, food labels are very, very important, so be sure to get in the habit of checking food labels just to see what's in the food you're eating. And as you can see here, they have total fat, saturated fat, and they have cholesterol, sodium, you don't want to eat too much sodium, and then total carbohydrates. And then on the right side, up at the top, they list ingredients, and the first ingredient has the largest amount of that in whatever it is that you're getting. Well, what prompted the diet changes? There were two physiologists, Dr. Keyes and Dr. Yudkin. And Dr. Keyes said that the problem with cardiovascular heart disease was from the dietary saturated fat, and it should be avoided. Dr. Yudkin said that sugar was causing all these problems, and it was decided by the people doing the studies that they should check out the saturated fat and see what that had to do. So they did a study called Framingham Heart Study, and that was begun in 1948 in Framingham, Massachusetts. And what they wanted to see was to identify risk factors for cardiovascular disease. And that's still an ongoing study. Well, Dietary Changes from the late 40s, there's some scientific studies showed from the late 40s a correlation between high-fat diets and high cholesterol levels, suggesting a low-fat diet might prevent heart disease in high-risk patients. So by the 1960s, the low-fat diet began to be touted not just for high-risk patients, but good for everybody. And to compensate for less fat in the food, sugar was added for taste. Less expensive than sugar was high fructose corn syrup, and it was added to many processed foods. And the cartoon says, it's good you're eating more fresh fruit and vegetables, but be careful to chew more thoroughly. Well, obesity became a big concern worldwide, and the U.S. between 1975 and projected here to 2025. So it's not just the U.S., but the world was getting heavier. And what you can see is perhaps the reason for that is that there was a big change in portion size from 1950 to today. And portion size is related to calories. Well, obesity. 57 million obese and sick people in the U.S. and 67 million normal weight and sick people. That suggests exposure, not obesity. That's slightly over 50% sick in the United States. Obesity is a marker, not a cause. Well, what's the cause? Something called Metabolic Syndrome. And that's a cluster of a variety of chronic conditions. such as obesity, diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, polycystic ovarian disease, high triglycerides, low HDL, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. Up to 40% of thin people have this syndrome. So obesity is a marker, not a cause. What causes metabolic syndrome? Well, they're still trying to figure that out. Currently, they say that overweight and obesity, an inactive lifestyle, insulin resistance, age, and genetics are a part of this. People who have metabolic syndrome often have excessive blood clotting and inflammation throughout the body. Researchers don't know whether these conditions cause metabolic syndrome or worsen it. Well, we used to be taught that the ideal weight is 100 pounds for 5 feet, and then you add 5 pounds for every inch over, or subtract 5 pounds for every inch under. So if you're 5'9", then you would add 9 times 5, and that's 45. You ought to weigh 145 pounds. Subtract 5 pounds for every inch under, and if you're 4'10", you'd have to subtract 10 from 100, and you should weigh ideally 90 pounds. And so the scientists said we ought to come up with something a little bit more scientific, and they did. And that's called body mass index, and that'll put you into 5 different categories: underweight, healthy, overweight, obese, extremely obese. And what you can see here along the left side, top to bottom, is height, and across the upper part from left to right is weight. And what you do is you find your height and draw a line across, imaginary line going across, and then an imaginary line coming down from your weight. Your BMI is going to be 41. And if you're 5'3", and you weigh 230 pounds, which is extremely obese. If you're 5'9" and weigh 150 pounds, your BMI is 22, and that's healthy. So there's a range of what's healthier or not. And if you're 6'2" and weigh 230 pounds, your BMI is 30, and that's obese. People who are muscle builders, bodybuilders, probably are going to mess up the scientific aspect of this way of determining, because muscle weighs more than fat. They may weigh more but be just as healthy or healthier. So we just talked about this. Portion changes over time. It's made a difference. And we've mentioned sugar in the past, but it's important to realize something called fructose can be found to be toxic to the liver. Now, you might say, well, gosh, fruits and vegetables have some fructose in them. But the other thing is they have fiber in them, and that's a protection against the fructose because it controls the rate that food goes through the intestine. And what you can see here is that table sugar, it's almost 50-50 with glucose and fructose. But as we go down that list, high fructose corn syrup has a little bit more fructose. Honey and agave have even more. We want to try to avoid that. And this is a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease that was mentioned, or just alcoholic fatty liver disease. But on the left is a normal-looking liver, and on the right side, this slide shows a fatty liver. And what has been seen just in the last 20 years or so is that 5-year-olds have gotten this, and they get it from drinking lots of soft drinks, and there is no fiber in sugar or high fructose corn syrup. And animal-derived food has no fiber. Soft drinks have none, and fiber is protective. So fructose can be toxic to the liver, as can alcohol. And then we'll talk a little bit about dairy here. Milk's usually obtained from cows, and that's a species that's different from humans. The cows are usually pregnant because they want them to produce a lot of milk. And the milk contains estrogen, which is a hormone, and that can affect human reproduction, male and female. Estrogen also increases certain cancer risks, and the species difference may cause a problem. The milk casein can be perceived as a foreign substance and stimulate an immune response, antibodies, and those antibodies may attack and destroy some cells in the pancreas that make insulin, and that can cause type 1 diabetes. Moms should nurse their babies and avoid cow's milk themselves in any form while nursing to avoid this possibility. Humans are the only species that drinks the milk of another species and continues to drink milk after weaning. Well, we all grew up with this, didn't we? Milk does a body good, and milk mustaches were a popular thing, and the advertising tells us everybody needs milk, and milk is not just for kids. Well, does milk do a body good? And what the health filmmaker Kip Anderson did in his documentary, he learned from many experts that support these claims and point out that the hormones and antibiotics fed to cows are not tested on humans and can have catastrophic results on dairy consumers. Citing studies from Harvard and Journal of National Cancer Institute, Anderson shows that milk not only doesn't protect against weak bones, but can also increase the risk of hormone-caused cancers such as uterine, breast, ovarian, and prostate cancer. So why is this information so invisible? And now we come to cheese, and everybody loves cheese, and it's really the hardest thing to give up. And yet it is not a healthy food. And it's not healthy because cheese is sort of concentrated milk with other things added, has a fat content of 70%. Now, one of the favorite meals in the U.S. is pizza, and you can see a bunch of different kinds of cheese are used to produce the pizza. There in the middle it shows why cheese is fattening. And why do we get hooked? Well, at the very bottom it says casomorphins. And what they are, digested parts from the casein in the milk that are very similar to morphine. And they go to our brain and implant on the same receptors that morphine would implant on. They're just not as strong as morphine. And it's probably why when babies are nursing, they just look so relaxed and happy. What do these animals eat? Where do they get their protein? They're all vegetarians. Well, where to get more information? And this was, I thought, an excellent introduction to health issues. And if we've never heard about it, we're not going to know about it. Well, I went through medical school, and they never talked about some of the issues that are shown on this DVD. A really rude awakening for me, because we get taught to diagnose and treat, when we should actually get an education that includes diagnosing, treating, but even more important, preventing. And we got none of the prevention. So where can you get some of this information? Well, books are one way, and libraries, a number of discount places where you can order books. And the first one here is Dr. Gilbert Welch. He's a great teacher. He's written, I think, 5 or 6 books. Overdiagnosed, Making People Sick in the Pursuit of Health, and Less Medicine, More Health. Overdiagnosed America was written by John Abramson, and he teaches family medicine at Harvard's medical school. And the truth about drug companies, how they deceive us and what to do about it, was written by Marcia Angel, who was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine for several years. Professor Davis is a research scientist, and he studies the immune system. This is an excellent book. More books worth reading, in my opinion, are The Spectrum and a later book, Undo It, Dr. Esselstyn's Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Dr. Lustig has done a lot of research, and he's a good teacher. And he wrote Fat Chance, Beating the Odds Against Sugar, Processed Food, Obesity, and Disease. And then Dr. Michael Greger is another excellent teacher, and he wrote How Not to Die. Now, the people that do the statistics say that percent of people that die is 100%. So that hasn't really changed. But you can sort of pick and choose what you die from if you know what causes it. And that's what this book, How Not to Die, is about. Well, if nutrition is so important, are there cookbooks? And yes, there's even a How Not to Die cookbook. And Dr. Esselstyn's Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, his wife added 150 recipes. Dr. Lustig had a cookbook. There's an Undo It diet cookbook. Dr. Neil Barnard has a diabetes superfoods. And he's written books that you might want to read too, especially if you're a diabetic. More books to consider. Are cell phones harmful? They may be in terms of brain tumors and infertility to some extent. Dr. Davis is a world expert, has a YouTube, was done in Australia. You can search YouTube and try to find that. Newer books worth reading are Feeding You Lies. You shouldn't believe everything you read. And an up-to-date, comprehensive, understandable book about health and breasts, written by a breast surgeon and expert. And this, I just mentioned Dr. Neil Barnard's book about how to reverse type 2 diabetes. And then the last book, The First Cell, is a book by a cancer expert, world cancer expert. It's about the current status of cancer treatment and how to improve it, because she feels that it's terrible the way we have to treat cancer patients today. We need better information. And that's what her book is about. Dr. Atul Gawande has written many books, and this is perhaps one of his very best. They're all good. What he talks about is his father's dying. His father was a physician, and since I think everyone, including doctors, has difficulty talking about death, I think reading this book would help us understand better how to deal with death. Shortest book to read is Know Your Chances. And it's good just to have a sense of what they're trying to tell you in an ad or medical news or whatever. And this is Dr. Greger, who's written a couple of books about how not to die. If you want, you can sign up free for a Monday through Friday email with either a 5 to 7 minute video or a text. Very, very interesting. And if you watch that daily over a week for a couple of years, you'll know a lot more about nutrition than when you started. Change is still going on. And on the left side here shows a picture of George Washington, the first president who got sick and was lying in bed, and he had his doctor come over. They decided that what caused the problems are humors in the blood. So if you get rid of some blood, it might help. So they removed 40% of his blood, but he didn't survive and he died, and that was way back in 1799. So we don't do that anymore, but change is still going on. And when many of us were born, there weren't computers or cell phones. Knowledge is also changing. As we get new information, it upgrades the older information. That's especially true with regard to health. We no longer bleed people when they get sick. We treat them with antibiotics or antivirals. And what's regarded as true today may not be true tomorrow. How would you like to have been a typewriter ribbon salesperson just before computers came out with the word processors? Well, these are some websites to investigate. I think they're all very, very informative. Set aside a particular time when you want to watch these. Some are not real long. The TED Talks, I think at most would be 20 minutes. Some might be longer than that. You know, you can turn them on or off. You're in charge. But at least I think they're worthwhile. And if you really want to learn as much as you can about health, I think these would be good resources. So that's all for now. Happy to answer a few questions, except your personal health questions. And just send me an email if you have a question. And also, let me know if there are other things that you'd like to hear about that you think I could present for you. And thanks for your attention.